The sun shone brightly over the city, lighting up the tall buildings, the busy streets, and the homes of both the rich and the poor. Among the richest of all was a man whose name everyone in business circles knew. He was a billionaire, a man who had built an empire from nothing, and now owned hotels, factories, and investments spread across many countries. His life looked perfect to outsiders. He had money, power, a beautiful mansion that seemed like a palace, and he had a family that people admired from afar. But inside his home, behind the grand walls and golden gates, there was a secret that filled the house with sadness. His only daughter had stopped eating. She was young, graceful, and had grown up surrounded by everything a person could wish for. From the day she was born, she had never lacked anything. Toys from different countries filled her playroom when she was small. Clothes stitched by famous designers filled her closet. She traveled in private jets when other children rode in cars or buses. Her childhood was filled with luxury, but also, sometimes, with loneliness. Because her parents were busy building and protecting their empire, they were often away, attending business meetings, meeting partners, or flying across the world. The girl spent her time with nannies, teachers, and staff members who cared for her, but none of them could take the place of a mother's embrace or a father's warmth. As she grew older, she learned to smile in public, to stand politely beside her parents at events, to wave to cameras, and to look perfect for the world. But inside her heart, she carried questions and quiet feelings that she never expressed. She often looked at the children outside the mansion gates running in the streets, laughing without worry, chasing each other in the rain. Sometimes she wished she could join them, just to feel free for a little while, to play without guards watching or rules holding her back. Everything changed when one morning, at breakfast, she simply pushed her plate away. It was not unusual for her to be quiet during meals, but this time she did not take a single bite. The staff thought she wasn't hungry, so they cleared the table. But the same thing happened at lunch. At dinner, too, she touched nothing. Her parents noticed but thought it was only a passing mood. Children sometimes refused food, and they expected she would eat again when she felt hungry. But the next day came, and the next, and still she would not eat. At first, the house staff whispered among themselves. Perhaps she wanted attention, perhaps she was upset about something. Doctors were called, and they checked her thoroughly. They found nothing wrong in her body. They gave medicines, vitamins, and advice, but she refused all of it. Nutritionists came with special meal plans, but she only turned her face away. Days turned into weeks, and the worry in the mansion grew heavier. The billionaire, who had faced business storms without fear, began to lose his calm. He had faced markets crashing, companies betraying him, and competitors trying to pull him down, but none of those challenges shook him like seeing his daughter's untouched plate. His wife, who had once been the picture of elegance at every event, now cried silently in her room, holding the family photo in her hands, wishing she could understand her child's silence. The daughter grew thinner as time went on. Her once bright face became pale. Her laughter, which was already rare, disappeared completely. She sat in her room, staring out of the window, watching the world pass by. The mansion's walls seemed to grow taller, as if they were trapping her inside. Servants tried to talk to her, bringing her favorite desserts, sweet fruits, and colorful drinks, but she would only shake her head. The family's secret began to leak outside. In circles of the rich, whispers started to spread. The billionaire's daughter has stopped eating, some said. She is sick with something no doctor can cure, others added. The newspapers had not yet picked up the story, but rumors travel faster than truth, and soon the family could not ignore that the outside world was beginning to wonder what was happening behind their gates. Inside the home, tension grew. The father paced the halls at night, unable to sleep. The mother sat beside her daughter, begging her softly, promising her gifts, trips, anything she wished, if only she would eat a little. But the girl would only close her eyes, as if she was far away in her own thoughts. Meals in the house became heavy moments of sadness. Once, the dining table was a place filled with conversations, clinking glasses, and the aroma of delicious food prepared by skilled cooks. Now, it was a place of silence, where everyone watched the girl push her plate aside. The chefs who had served the family for years felt helpless. They had cooked for kings, presidents, and celebrities, but they could not make this young girl take even a spoonful. The father decided he would not give up. If his chefs could not make her eat, then he would bring in the best from the world. With money, he could buy anything, and he believed he could buy a solution to this problem as well. He made calls, sent messages, and within days, 5 of the top chefs in the world were flown into the city. They came from France, Italy, Japan, America, and Spain. Each one was famous, with restaurants that earned awards and dishes that cost fortunes. They entered the mansion like warriors coming to a battlefield, confident that their skills could solve the family's crisis. The girl, however, stayed the same. She watched silently as dish after dish was brought before her. The food was decorated like art, shining under silver covers, smelling of spices from across the world. The chef stood proudly, waiting for her reaction, but she only lowered her eyes and refused. Her hands remained still, her lips closed. The food was carried away untouched. The father grew angry, not at his daughter, but at the situation. How could the best talents in the world fail? How could money not fix what was broken? The chefs tried again and again, each day bringing something new, but nothing worked. The mansion, once a symbol of wealth and power, was now filled with despair. No one knew what the girl truly felt inside. She had everything, yet she longed for something invisible. Perhaps she wanted warmth that could not be bought, or love that could not be served on a golden plate. While the world outside admired her father's riches, inside, the daughter was drifting farther away, and no one could reach her. The first part of her story ends with uncertainty. The father is restless, the mother heartbroken, the chefs defeated, and the staff worried. And the daughter, sitting quietly by her window, continues to refuse the food that could save her life. The arrival of the 5 world-famous chefs brought a new kind of energy into the mansion. For a brief moment, hope returned to the family. The father believed that with their skills, something would finally change. The mother, though exhausted from sleepless nights, managed to smile again, believing that her daughter would finally eat. The staff, too, whispered in relief, thinking that the world's best hands were now working in their kitchen. But deep inside the young girl's room, nothing had changed. She sat quietly, her eyes empty, her lips sealed, while the world outside her door prepared for a miracle. The first chef to arrive was a Frenchman, known for his delicate pastries and rich flavors that could melt in anyone's mouth. He wore his white chef coat proudly, his hat tall and crisp. The mansion's kitchen, already large and beautiful, looked like a royal hall as he unpacked crates of butter, chocolates, and spices flown directly from France. He worked with precision, carefully mixing, whisking, and baking. Hours later, the smell of warm croissants, sweet tarts, and chocolate soufflés spread through the halls. The air itself seemed to carry comfort and delight. When he presented the tray to the young girl, her parents held their breath. The chef smiled confidently as the plate was placed before her. The golden croissants were soft, the chocolate shined, and the tarts looked like little jewels. Everyone waited for her to take just one bite. But she simply lowered her gaze and shook her head. The tray was carried away untouched. The French chef sighed deeply, his pride wounded, but he promised to try again the next day. The second chef was Italian, famous for pastas and pizzas that had made people travel across oceans just for a taste. He was a man of warmth and laughter, and he believed that food was not just about taste but about love and family. He filled the kitchen with the sound of sizzling pans, boiling sauces, and the smell of garlic, basil, and tomatoes. He rolled the dough with care, spread the sauce with joy, and sprinkled cheese as if he were painting a masterpiece. When he presented the food, the mansion smelled like an Italian street in the evening. A plate of pasta was placed before the girl, rich with flavor and color. The chef even spoke to her kindly, telling her stories of Italian families eating together. But still, she sat silently, staring at the plate as though it were invisible. Her fork remained untouched. The Italian chef's smile faded. He looked at the parents with sadness in his eyes. He had cooked with love, but his love could not reach her. The third chef came from Japan, known worldwide for his skill in making sushi so delicate that each piece looked like art. He was quiet, calm, and full of discipline. He believed that food was a way to bring peace to the soul. His hands moved like a dancer's as he sliced fish, rolled rice, and shaped the sushi with precision. He added colors of seaweed, ginger, and wasabi, creating a plate that looked like a rainbow. The staff whispered in awe at the beauty of his work. The plate was placed before the girl. She glanced at it once, then turned her head away. The Japanese chef bowed deeply, his face calm, but his heart heavy. He had crafted beauty, but beauty alone could not awaken her hunger. The fourth chef was from America, bold and creative, known for mixing flavors and creating exciting dishes that surprised people with every bite. He brought with him colorful sauces, crispy fried foods, and desserts stacked high with cream and fruit. The kitchen roared with fire and laughter as he worked. His dishes smelled playful, full of adventure, full of life. When they were brought to the girl, everyone thought perhaps this cheerful energy would make her eat. The chef himself knelt before her, speaking kindly, telling her she could choose anything she liked from the tray. But she only pressed her lips tighter, her eyes distant. The colorful dishes were taken away, and silence filled the room again. The fifth chef came from Spain, carrying with him spices, olive oils, and recipes that told stories of old traditions. He cooked paella with rice, seafood, and vegetables, filled with flavor and warmth. The dish looked bright, like a painting of summer. He served it with pride, explaining the history of the meal, hoping to spark some interest in her heart. The family waited once more, desperate, but nothing changed. She did not touch it. The chef's shoulders dropped in defeat. He, too, had failed. Day after day, the chefs tried again. They brought more dishes, different flavors, endless creations. They woke before dawn, working until late at night, trying every possible recipe they knew. The kitchen became like a stage, with chefs competing silently, each hoping their dish would be the one to save her. But each attempt ended the same way: the food returned untouched. The father grew restless. He began pacing more often, shouting at the staff, asking why nothing was working. His frustration turned into anger, though deep down it was not anger at them, but at his own helplessness. The mother tried to calm him, but her own heart was breaking. She sat beside her daughter for hours, begging her softly, tears falling onto her hands. But no matter how much she pleaded, the girl remained silent, her eyes far away as if looking into another world. The mansion, though filled with people, felt empty. The staff moved quietly, their footsteps soft, their voices low. The grand halls, once echoing with laughter during parties and gatherings, were now silent, carrying only the sound of worry. The chefs, who had arrived with confidence, now avoided each other's eyes. Their pride had been broken, and even their skill could not bring change. The daughter's body grew weaker. Her hands became thin, her face pale, her steps light and unsteady. Doctors returned again, checking her, giving advice, but nothing worked. The father's phone calls became desperate. He reached out to anyone who might have a solution, but none came. The truth began to sink in: money could buy the most expensive ingredients, the finest chefs, and the rarest spices, but it could not force a single spoon of food into his daughter's mouth. The staff began to whisper among themselves that perhaps it was not food she needed, but something else. Some said maybe her soul was hungry, not her stomach. Others said maybe she longed for something that the rich could not understand. The whispers reached the ears of one person in particular, the maid who had worked in the mansion quietly for many years. She was often overlooked, moving silently in the background, cleaning, carrying, serving, and returning to her duties without drawing attention. But she had watched everything. She had seen the daughter's sadness, the mother's tears, the father's anger, and the chef's failures. In her heart, she felt something different. She felt that what the girl needed was not wealth, not luxury, but warmth. But for now, the family had not turned to her. They were still looking outward, still hoping that one of the chefs might find a secret recipe that would succeed. Yet each passing day made it clearer the solution was not in the golden kitchen filled with famous men, but perhaps in a simple heart that understood hunger in another way. And so part 2 closes with the mansion still drowning in despair. The chefs had tried and failed. The daughter remained silent. The parents' hope weakened with every day. And in the shadows of the grand house, the maid quietly carried her thoughts, waiting for the moment when perhaps she might step forward. The days turned into weeks, and the mansion that once sparkled with laughter and light now seemed heavy with silence. Every hallway carried an invisible weight. The father walked with a restless pace, his shoes clicking sharply against the marble floor. The mother moved softly, her eyes red from tears, her voice faint whenever she spoke. The staff whispered in corners, careful not to be heard, and the 5 famous chefs who had once arrived with confidence now looked defeated, their shoulders bent, their pride gone. The daughter, the center of everyone's worry, grew weaker as the days passed. Her frame became fragile, her skin pale, her lips dry. She spent most of her time by the window, staring at the world outside as though she were longing for something far beyond the gates. Sometimes, her fingers would trace shapes on the glass, little circles or lines, as if she were writing messages no one could understand. She never spoke about what she felt, and no one dared to disturb the silence she wrapped herself in. The father, who had always been a man of strength, began to lose control. His face, once calm and confident, was now lined with worry. He shouted more often at the staff, demanding answers they did not have. His voice echoed through the halls, sharp and full of anger, but the anger was not truly at them. It was at himself, at life, at the helplessness that no money or power could solve. He had faced challenges in business, defeated rivals, and built an empire with his willpower. But now, in his own home, he stood powerless before his daughter's silence. The mother carried her sorrow differently. She sat quietly by her daughter's bed, holding her hand, whispering soft words, trying to coax her into eating, trying to remind her of happier days. Sometimes, she brought photo albums filled with memories of childhood, pictures of birthdays, of trips, of moments when the little girl had smiled. She pointed at the images, telling her how beautiful she looked, how happy she once was, begging her to return to those days. But the girl would only close her eyes, as if she could not bear to see the reflection of a past that felt too far away. The doctors continued to visit, their expressions growing more serious each time. They spoke quietly to the parents, warning them of the dangers, suggesting treatments, but none of it mattered. If she would not eat, nothing could help. Nutrition drips were offered, but even those she resisted, turning her head away or refusing to cooperate. The family felt trapped in a cage of despair, watching their daughter fade day by day. The staff, though loyal and hard-working, began to feel the strain. Some believed the girl was cursed, others whispered that perhaps she was punishing her parents for neglecting her heart while giving her everything else. Some said she simply wanted love, not riches. Their whispers floated through the mansion like shadows, never spoken aloud in front of the family, but always present, always lingering in the air. The chefs, once proud masters of flavor, no longer spoke of recipes or ideas. They sat in the kitchen quietly, their hands still but their minds restless. They had tried everything they knew, but nothing had worked. The mansion's grand kitchen, filled with tools and ingredients from across the world, felt like a battlefield where every battle had been lost. The father's frustration reached a breaking point one evening. After yet another untouched meal was carried away from his daughter's room, he slammed his hand against the table in the dining hall. The sound rang through the mansion like thunder. The staff froze, the mother flinched, and silence followed. He shouted that he was tired of failure, tired of helplessness, tired of watching his daughter fade before his eyes. His voice broke as he admitted what he had never admitted before, that he was afraid. Afraid of losing her. Afraid that all his power meant nothing when it came to saving the one person he loved most. The mother tried to calm him, but her own tears spilled as she confessed her own fears. She said she felt like a stranger in her own daughter's life, unable to reach her, unable to comfort her. She spoke of guilt, of how busy they had been, how often they had left her with others while they traveled and worked. Her voice trembled as she wondered aloud if their daughter's silence was a reflection of their absence. That night, the mansion felt colder than ever. The chandeliers still sparkled, the gold frames on the walls still glowed, the carpets still softened every step, but none of it brought warmth. The riches felt empty, meaningless, like decorations in a house without life. The father sat alone in his study, staring at the glow of the city lights outside, wondering how a man who could control empires could not save his own child. The mother stayed by her daughter's side, whispering prayers into the night, holding her fragile hand as if afraid it might slip away. Meanwhile, the staff lay awake in their quarters, unable to sleep. They spoke quietly to each other, their voices heavy with sympathy. They had all seen the girl grow up, and though she was the daughter of wealth, she was also just a child who seemed starved not of food, but of something deeper. Some of them thought she needed simplicity, something real, something not wrapped in gold or served on silver trays. But no one dared to speak these thoughts to the parents, afraid of being dismissed, afraid of overstepping their place. Among them, the maid, the quiet black woman who had worked in the mansion for years, listened more than she spoke. She remembered the times she had seen the girl sitting alone in the garden, staring at the flowers. She remembered how often the child had chosen silence over noise, how often she seemed distant even when surrounded by luxury. She had served meals, carried plates, and cleaned rooms, but she had also noticed things others ignored. And in her heart, she began to feel a quiet certainty that the girl did not need fancy dishes or expensive ingredients. What she needed was something simple, something made with care, something made with love. But the moment had not yet come for the maid to step forward. For now, the mansion remained in its state of despair, the family on the edge of breaking, the chefs silent, the staff hopeless. The girl continued to sit by her window, her face pale against the glass, her eyes looking outward as if searching for something beyond reach. The breaking point was near. The father could no longer hide his anger, the mother could no longer hide her guilt, and the staff could no longer hide their worry. Each day that passed felt heavier than the last, each untouched played a wound to their hearts. The mansion, though still grand in appearance, felt hollow inside, like a shell of what it once was. And yet, within this silence, a quiet hope was forming in the heart of someone who had never been asked for help, someone who had always remained in the background. The maid knew she could not stay silent forever. She knew that sometimes, solutions are not found in wealth, but in humility. Sometimes, healing does not come from the best in the world, but from the simplest of hands. The stage was being set for a change, though no one yet realized it. The family's despair had reached its deepest point, the chefs had given their best and failed, and the girl continued her refusal. But in the shadows, a gentle strength was waiting, ready to step forward when the time was right. The mansion had grown tired with silence. Each day began with hope that the girl might eat, and each night ended with disappointment when plates returned untouched. The chefs had long given up their pride, though they stayed, hoping for a miracle. The father grew quieter now, no longer shouting as often, his anger replaced by a hollow sadness. The mother spent nearly every waking moment beside her daughter, brushing her hair, holding her hand, and begging softly for her to eat even a spoonful. But the girl remained the same, her thin figure growing weaker, her face pale, her lips pressed shut like a locked door. It was during one of these long days that the maid, the quiet woman who had served the family for years, began to feel a stronger pull in her heart. She had watched the struggle silently, carrying trays back and forth, cleaning dishes that were never touched, sweeping the hallways that echoed with sorrow. But she had also noticed something deeper. She saw how the daughter's eyes softened, just a little, whenever the staff spoke kindly to her. She saw how the girl stared at the garden flowers in the morning, at the birds sitting on the branches, as if she longed for something simple and pure. One evening, when the mansion felt heavier than usual, the maid stood in the kitchen after everyone had left. The chefs were in their rooms, the staff had retreated quietly, and the house was wrapped in uneasy silence. She looked at the shelves lined with expensive spices, the refrigerators filled with rare ingredients from across the world. None of these had worked. None of these had touched the girl's heart. And then the maid thought of her own childhood, far away from this palace. She remembered the small kitchen of her grandmother, the wooden table, the clay stove, and the simple meals that had carried love in every bite. Food that was not decorated with gold or served on silver, but food that comforted, food that healed. Her hands began to move almost without thinking. She took a pot, filled it with water, and placed it on the stove. Instead of the rare spices and costly ingredients, she reached for the simplest things: fresh vegetables, a little rice, some herbs she had carried in her apron pocket from the garden. She chopped slowly, carefully, her heart guiding her more than her hands. The smell was not grand or overwhelming. It was gentle, familiar, like the smell of home. The maid stirred the pot quietly, humming a tune her grandmother used to sing. She added a pinch of salt, a little oil, nothing fancy, nothing rich. Just enough to make it warm and comforting. When she lifted the spoon to taste it, she closed her eyes. It reminded her of her childhood evenings when her grandmother would call her in from playing outside and set a bowl before her. The warmth would fill not only her stomach but her heart too. She hoped, silently, that maybe this same warmth could reach the girl. When the meal was ready, she poured it into a simple bowl. No decoration, no silver tray, no fancy covers. Just a plain bowl with plain food, steaming gently in the air. She held it carefully in her hands and began to walk toward the girl's room. Her heart beat fast, for she knew she had not been asked to do this. The chefs might laugh at her attempt. The father might be angry that she had dared to act without permission. But something inside her told her that she must try. She entered the girl's room quietly. The mother sat in the corner, exhausted from hours of waiting. The girl sat by the window, her face turned toward the fading evening light. The maid stepped forward slowly, holding the bowl close. She placed it on the small table near the girl and spoke softly. "I made this for you," she said. Her voice was gentle, filled not with command but with care. The girl turned her eyes to the bowl. The food did not shine, it did not sparkle with color, it did not look like art. But it smelled warm, real, and simple. For the first time in many weeks, her nose twitched at the scent. The maid did not beg, she did not push, she only sat quietly beside the table. She folded her hands in her lap and waited, as if she were not there to feed a rich man's daughter, but simply to share a little piece of her own heart. Minutes passed in silence. The mother watched, hardly daring to breathe. Then, slowly, the girl lifted her hand. Her fingers, thin and weak, reached for the spoon. She dipped it into the bowl, lifted it shakily, and brought it to her lips. The first sip was small, but it was enough. The warmth of the food spread through her mouth, down her throat, into her chest. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in months, she felt something inside her break open. Tears filled her eyes and rolled down her cheeks. She took another spoonful, and another, crying softly as she ate. The mother gasped, covering her mouth with her hands. Her own tears fell freely as she whispered her daughter's name again and again. The maid sat quietly, her own eyes wet, but her heart steady. She had not cooked with technique, not with luxury, but with love. And it was love that had reached the girl where nothing else could. When the father entered the room, called by the sound of his wife's cries, he froze at the sight. His daughter, who had refused food for so long, was eating. Not the expensive meals of the world's best chefs, but the humble dish made by his maid. His lips trembled as he watched her. For a moment, he could not speak. Then, slowly, he lowered himself into a chair and buried his face in his hands. His shoulders shook, not from anger this time, but from relief. The girl finished half the bowl before setting the spoon down, her body too weak to continue. But that half bowl was more than anyone had imagined possible. It was proof that she could be reached, proof that she could still return. The mother rushed to her side, hugging her gently, while the father sat silently, letting his tears fall. The maid stood in the corner, her hands folded, her eyes lowered. She did not seek praise, she did not seek thanks. She only felt peace that the girl had eaten. Word spread quickly through the mansion. The staff whispered in amazement, the chefs bowed their heads in quiet acceptance, knowing that the answer had not been found in their skills but in something simpler. That night, the mansion felt different. The air was lighter, the silence softer, as if hope had been reborn within its walls. The father, later that evening, called the maid to his study. He looked at her with eyes still red from tears, and his voice trembled as he thanked her. He admitted that he had spent fortunes trying to buy a solution, but she had given what money could not. The mother, too, embraced her, whispering her gratitude. But the maid only said, "I did what I could." She needed something real. And so, in the grandest mansion, filled with the richest treasures, it was a simple bowl of food, cooked with love by a quiet maid, that had broken the silence and touched the heart of a girl who had refused everything else. The night after the girl ate from the maid's bowl was unlike any night the mansion had seen in months. For the first time, there was a soft sense of relief, like a breeze entering a house that had been sealed too long. The staff whispered with smiles, unable to hide their joy. The chefs, though humbled, walked quietly with a new respect for the quiet maid who had done what none of them could. The mother did not leave her daughter's side, holding her hand gently as if she feared letting go would break the miracle. The father, who had always walked like a man of iron, now moved slowly, carefully, as though afraid of disturbing the fragile peace. The daughter slept peacefully that night, her chest rising and falling with steady breaths. Her face, though still pale and thin, seemed calmer, as though a heavy burden had lifted. The mother wept silently beside her, tears of relief soaking into her pillow. The father stayed awake in the study, staring at the glowing city lights outside the window. He thought of all the money he had spent, all the calls he had made, all the power he had tried to use to solve the problem. And yet, the solution had come not from wealth, but from something his money could never buy: love, sincerity, and simplicity. The next morning, when the girl awoke, the maid entered quietly with another small bowl of food. This time, it was porridge, warm and soft, with a few fresh fruits cut on the side. The girl looked at it, hesitated, and then, to everyone's amazement, took a few spoonfuls. Her hands still shook, and she could not finish much, but the act itself was a victory. The mother clapped her hands to her mouth in joy, while the father's eyes filled again with tears. The maid only bowed her head, whispering, "Step by step." Each day that followed, the maid cooked something new. Not dishes decorated with gold or ingredients from faraway lands, but meals that carried comfort. Soups that warmed the body, bread baked softly, rice cooked with vegetables, and little treats like sweet pudding that reminded the girl of childhood innocence. The food was simple, but each bite seemed to awaken something inside the girl. She began to eat slowly, carefully, tasting not just the food but the love behind it. The girl's strength started to return, little by little. Her face gained a soft color again, her hands grew steadier, and her eyes, once dull, began to shine faintly. She still spent much of her time in silence, but her silence no longer felt as heavy as before. Sometimes, she smiled faintly at the maid, a small gesture, but one that filled the mother's heart with hope. The father, too, found himself sitting quietly by her side, no longer pacing the halls in frustration but listening to the sound of her spoon gently tapping the bowl. The 5 chefs, though their pride had been tested, stayed on in the mansion. They no longer tried to impress the girl with their grand dishes. Instead, they began to learn from the maid. They watched how she cooked, not with fancy tricks or techniques, but with patience and care. They noticed how she hummed softly as she stirred the pot, how she touched each ingredient with respect, how she served with humility. For them, it became a lesson they had never learned in all their years of training that food is not just about taste or beauty, but about heart. The mansion itself began to feel different. The long dining table, once filled with untouched plates, now carried the smell of warm meals that brought comfort instead of tension. The halls, once echoing with despair, now carried softer sounds, footsteps without rush, whispers without fear. The staff, once weighed down by hopelessness, now moved with lighter steps, their hearts lifted by the sight of the girl recovering. The father changed most of all. He, who had always measured life by success and power, began to see his world differently. He realized how fragile everything truly was, how meaningless wealth became when his daughter refused food. He saw that all the riches in the world could not replace sincerity, could not heal a heart. One evening, he sat with the maid in the study, his voice quiet, almost breaking. "You gave me something I could never buy," he said. "You reminded me that love is not measured in gold, but in the small things we do with honesty." The maid, humble as always, lowered her eyes and simply replied, she only needed to feel cared for. The mother, too, changed. She no longer filled her days only with social events or business duties. She devoted her time to being with her daughter, listening to her, sitting beside her, brushing her hair, and sometimes cooking with the maid in the kitchen. At first, she fumbled with the pots and pans, but the maid guided her gently, showing her that love in food did not come from perfection, but from presence. Slowly, the mother began to rebuild a bond with her daughter that had been missing for years. As the weeks passed, the girl's strength returned. She began to walk slowly through the garden, her thin figure wrapped in a shawl, her steps careful but steady. The flowers seemed to bloom brighter when she passed, and the birds seemed to sing louder. The staff watched her with smiles, whispering prayers of thanks. The mother often walked beside her, holding her arm gently, while the father followed at a distance, his eyes always watching, always protecting. The turning point came one afternoon when the girl, sitting at the dining table with her parents, lifted her eyes and spoke softly. "Thank you." It was only 2 words, but they were enough to bring tears to her parents' eyes. For months, they had not heard her voice, and now those words carried more weight than any speech. The mother wept openly, hugging her, while the father whispered, "You have given me back my world." From that day, the mansion was never the same. The maid was no longer just a servant in the background. She became a part of the family, respected and loved. The father ensured she was honored for what she had done, though she asked for nothing in return. The chefs, too, carried the lesson with them, humbled but grateful to have witnessed the power of simplicity. The story spread quietly among those who knew the family. People whispered about how the billionaire's daughter had refused food for months, how the world's best chefs had failed, and how a simple maid had saved her with love. Some dismissed it as a tale, others as exaggeration, but those who had been inside the mansion knew the truth. For the father, the lesson stayed with him forever. He continued his business, still powerful, still respected, but his heart had changed. He no longer measured everything by numbers or wealth. He measured it by love, by time spent with his family, by the simple joys that no money could buy. The mother, too, grew softer, her elegance now carrying warmth instead of distance. And the daughter, though still quiet, grew stronger each day, her silence now filled not with emptiness, but with peace. The maid remained by their side, continuing her work, though now she was treated with dignity that matched her heart. She did not see herself as a hero, only as someone who did what she could. But in truth, she had done what no one else could. She had touched a heart that had been locked away. And so, the story of the billionaire's daughter did not end with despair, but with hope. It reminded everyone who heard it that love cannot be bought, that the simplest things often carry the deepest meaning, and that sometimes, the greatest wealth is not gold or silver, but a bowl of food made with care. The mansion, once filled with silence, once weighed down with sorrow, now carried a new kind of richness. Not the richness of money, but the richness of love, of family, of humanity. And the girl, once fading, now stood as proof that hearts are healed not by luxury, but by kindness.